Until I was about 37, nobody really knew what I sounded like because I really didn't talk to anybody. Had nothing to do with my intelligence. It's just that I was one of those people who you get stomach aches when you try to talk to strangers, so I didn't. If you talk to me, I talk to you. I titled my speech today as I showed up. This is an actual picture of my neighborhood. I was actually born there. This is way back in the 20s and 30s. And basically, I guess in Sarasota County, everybody's neighborhood probably looked like this. But this neighborhood was unique because it was an African-American neighborhood. And none of these houses were owned by anybody except one person that owned all that property. This is the house I was born in. I live across from that house right now, in my neighborhood still. This is how that neighborhood is. It's close-knit. People die there. They don't normally move away if you were born there. This is another picture of that same street. It's Church Street, where these little row houses were back in the 1940s. You didn't have roads back then. We didn't even have ditches. I mean, some people had roads and then they had ditches. We didn't even have the ditches. We just had the little road wherever anybody drove down it and made a trail. My showing up is a story. I was always involved, especially with my kids, and I did something that most people wouldn't do. I showed up at school board meetings. I don't know, that's just been me. And they had this discussion at the school board meeting going on. There was a contractor trying to buy a historic school so he could tear it down and build a gas station. And the people behind it didn't want that done. I'm sure you guys know a situation like that. And he just got frustrated because the people complained they didn't want the lights, they didn't want him there, and he just gave up. He says, he just gave up. And I happened to be sitting in the audience. And the way my mind works, it's like, oh man, I would make a nice community center. But it was on the opposite side of 41 from where my community is. So I embarked on trying to find out what it would cost to move that building or, make it a community center. And they told me it would be $900,000. Now this was way back in 1980 something. That was a lot of money. So I said, that's a lot of money. You can build a building for that. As things went on, and I was just curious, and I would say things like there's going to be a community center over there on that vacant lot one day, and people thought I was crazy. They really thought I was crazy. But I called a commissioner, and he sent me to somebody else, and that person says, oh yeah, I've got a park that I can't build in a neighborhood that was very expensive, so he moved the park to my neighborhood. And then came, where do you get the money to buy the land? Where do you get the money to build the building? But then Sarasota County was just applying for community development block grant money, and happened to be sitting in the commissioner's office talking to him one day, and he goes, well, there's somebody writing some kind of grant upstairs, maybe you ought to go talk to them. So I did. I went and talked to her, and it was the CBBG grant that they get. We got the first project in that grant, and the park went in that grant. A lot of people didn't know that grant was even there, but I was showing up in a lot of places. I would show up at commission meetings with 5 commissioners and one other guy and me. Nobody came to commission meetings, and I couldn't understand. They're running the whole county and nobody comes. I was there. I'd trade my day off to be there, and I'd be there, and I'd listen to what they said. I showed up in places where nobody wanted me to show up, because when I showed up, they knew something had to get done because I wouldn't give up. Unfortunately, I still have that reputation. This little thing right here, no, the next, go back. This little thing right here, a lot of people have in their front yard. It's where your water goes through. When I was growing up, my sister will kill me again, we didn't even have our own outhouse. We had our aunt's outhouse 2 doors down. We didn't have running water. This was an accomplishment for a little organization in a little community called, it's Laurel Civic Association, to get water. Because the wells were drying up, the water was bad. You don't know how many meetings I showed up at to get that water in there, and that was not easy. Showing up, got a 15-acre park with a community center in it that nobody ever in their wildest dreams would have thought was going to go in that community. Showing up has something about it. It's okay to show up, but you have to know where to show up. And when you show up there, you need to know what you want and ask for it. And after you ask for it, you need to keep showing up to make sure they do it, because they'll put it in file 13 if you don't come back. So you have to keep showing up. You have to keep asking, and you got to let them know this is what you want done. That building, started trying to get that building in like 1990 when the county got the grant. The building was finished in '93. The ribbon cutting was in January of '94. I just thought about that lately, of the time frame from when that started to when that got finished. In a community where you couldn't even get the county to mow the grass on the side of the road or do anything else. We got this beautiful community center there. And I guess I showed up enough that they named it after me. And in that picture, I think there's 3 commissioners and the sheriff there. He became a really good friend of mine. And Bob Anderson right there, he definitely, I showed up a lot in his office. This is the community center right now. We have programs in there through the Laurel Civic Association. We have homework assistance programs. We have feeding programs for adults. We have kids cafe after school for kids. We have summer programs. We have camp in there. And onto that building after it was finished was a portion that was built just for Laurel Civic Association and its programs. And that got done because I showed up in a meeting that I really wasn't supposed to be in. But somebody said something in the meeting which prompted me to not be happy. And as a result, the building had an addition added onto it just for us. So, you know, you show up in the right place or you show up in the wrong place. It helps. That spot up there is where all those row houses used to be. And that's how the land looked before they started building the building. And one of the good things that came out of doing that building, it was federal money, and they had to do an archaeological survey on the entire neighborhood and the piece of property. So we have a book this thick that's an archaeological survey of our neighborhood and the surroundings and the houses and the roads and everything that came out of that. Down here, I don't stop. We needed sidewalks. So this was a sidewalk project. And back there in the corner was this little bitty organization that got money to buy land to build affordable housing. I mean, we built affordable housing We got the sidewalks there. We got the streets paved. We got a drainage project done so that the kids didn't have to walk through 4 feet of water to get to school anymore, because that's how we grow up, wading 2 or 3 feet of water to get out of the neighborhood to get to wherever you went when it was raining. We don't have to do that anymore. That's the way our street looked during construction. Down here is the ribbon cutting for when we got the sidewalks and the drainage and the street paved. And in that project was paving of side streets. Now that doesn't sound like a big thing, but we only had that one road, and the streets that went off of it weren't really streets. They were private property, and they have been that way so long that the people who own the property didn't think they owned it. So we had to convince them so they could give it to us so we could make it a road. There's stuff that goes into this. So now we have side streets that are paved. This was in our neighborhood plan. We did a neighborhood plan. It took 2 or 3 years to do that, and it took probably another 5 for them to get everything completed. We just got a project in the park completed, which was another drainage project. This street right here in this ribbon cutting that you're looking at, when Laurel Civic Association was formed in '69, it was headed by some very strong community volunteers. All men, I think. But we're talking 1969. If you were a black male, you didn't even exist. I don't care who you were. So them trying to talk with the county officials and to get things done, it was hard. It took a lot to even go and try to do that. I guess I came along in about 1988 when I really got involved in getting things changed and that kind of stuff. But from the time they started trying to get a street through, because we lived in a lone cul-de-sac. You go in and it was one way in, one way out. Try to get this street through forever. It took 30 years to get that street through. That's the ribbon cutting for that street. Like I said, you can't just show up once. You gotta keep showing up for 30 years to get something done. And that's the street you can see right there. It goes through. And what happened is our water line project now connects to somebody else's water line project, and we've got good flow, and that street goes through to 41. It's amazing what you can do if you just keep showing up. This is our park today. Our new pond, retention pond, our walking trail, our playground equipment, and that's a picture of it right there. We just had a group of orthopedic surgeons do a playground project for us last year that put playground equipment in the park with an adult piece and a child piece in each pod. So much stuff goes on in this park. I personally think it's the most beautiful park in Sarasota County. I don't know. I may be a little prejudiced. I know we do more activities in our park than the other county parks, because Laurel Civic is there and we do a lot of stuff in that building. This is our parking lot. That might not mean a lot to you, but it means a lot to us because we do a lot of things, and we get 400 people at our Christmas party and our summer party. We needed parking. That parking lot was just a godsend. This is a reading garden on the back of the building that was built on for us. That was a grant. Everything our Laurel Civic Association does is grants, donations, and volunteers, and that was that's our reading garden. This is that street right there where all of those little row houses were. That's the street down there on the left, on the bottom. That's the way it looks right now, with curbs and sidewalks and paved street and a community center. This is Laurel Civic Association. This is what we do now. We are very small. We're very small. And when I say grants, donations, and volunteers, I mean it. We use 200 or 300 volunteers a year. But the important thing is that to get anything done, you gotta show up. And that's a reputation that I've gotten, is I will show up. Because when you show up, it's the only way you can get information. People aren't going to go to a meeting and come back and just try to tell everybody what happened. You got to show up yourself. And once you're there and you get the information, and this is what I used to do a lot, and people would really look at me and they didn't like it. And I would say, you know what? If you want this pot to move, you have to do something like move it. You can't talk to it and say move pot. You have to do something. You can show up, but once you show up, you got to do something. And you got to make sure it's something that helps, even if it's not everybody. It's got to help most of the people, or it's got to help somebody. So just remember, show up in the right place, listen, glean all the information you can, and then you go back and use it. And the other thing about showing up is, don't be afraid to be the only one that's showing up if you know it's right. Because in my community, I didn't have a bunch of entrepreneurs or retired teachers or whoever to group together to come and help me. I had volunteers. I had people who would stand behind me forever, anything that I do, but they didn't understand what I was doing. And that was okay, as long as they supported me. And I came from a community like that. So you can't just not show up and do something because you're by yourself. If I had done that, we would have no running water. We would have no sidewalks. We wouldn't have a community center. We would have none of that if I had to have a bunch of people go with me when I showed up at all these meetings and showed up in all these commissioner spaces and everywhere else that I showed up. That's my story. And just show up.